Hello, and welcome to Grief Liberation Conversations in Community. I am Maddie, your host, and I appreciate you being on this journey with me. I am excited for my guest today. Would you prefer me calling you Chris or Christine?
Christine's fine.
Welcome to the show, Christine.
Hi.
What are your pronouns?
My pronouns are they, she, they.
I use they, them pronouns. I appreciate you being here today, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm middle-aged. I live in Vermont. I'm an artist, but I am also a nurse practitioner, currently working in healthcare systems, but soon to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And I have a cat who you might hear at some point. And I like extreme sledding and kayaking. I like being outside with nature.
Awesome. So, before we get started, since we're going to be talking about grief, I thought it would be important to do a breath together. One of the exercises I use a lot when I am about to embark on either difficult or some kind of topic that I'm unsure about how it's going to land or how I'm going to feel about it, I start with a breath that's called the physiological sigh. And in this technique, you take a full breath of air, and when your lungs feel like they're at capacity, you're going to take just an extra sip after that, and then you hold it for about 4 counts, and then breathe out for 6 to 8 counts.
Sounds
So
good.
here we go. All right. How you feeling?
Good. Good. That worked.
Good. Awesome. So, as an artist, what is your favorite medium or mediums?
Well, I do a variety of things because I have ADHD and I can't help myself. So it's never really the same type of art that I'm doing from month to month or year to year. Generally, what I like to do is what I call large scale assemblage pieces,
Mm.
which sort of fitting in a way because that I chose to talk about them over anything else here because I actually create a piece on a 5x5 piece of wood paneling, 5x5 feet, and create a piece which I eventually destroy and burn and totally abolish and get rid of what's there, and then do something completely different based off from that.
That's
So
neat.
that's one type of art that I create.
Mm. That reminds me of the sand mandalas that I've seen Buddhist monks do. Like they'll take days and days to create this piece of art, and then they have a ceremony where they walk it to a lake or river or somewhere where there's a body of water, and they just let it go. There's a lot of Americans really have a hard time with that because they're like, oh, this is such a beautiful thing. Why would you just destroy it? And I
Right.
think it's a reminder that the journey is part of that process. And yeah, I think it's beautiful. So I love that.
Yeah,
Can you share a little bit more about that?
put everything I have into this large image, which sometimes can take months to create. And sometimes, like I said, they're assemblage pieces. So sometimes there's other things added on. And I'll end up taking this huge, big piece of wood with, like paneled backing and bring it out to my fire pit and just watch it burn these things that I've created. And I wait, it's sort of a controlled burn. I wait until things are destroyed just enough to keep, the frame, to get rid of what was there and to keep the frame. And then at that point, I I really enjoy myself one during the destruction process, the burning process, because it's transforming into something completely different. And what
Yeah.
was holding me to the older piece is suddenly gone. And that feels very liberating for me. And then I wait for the piece to sort of settle for a week or two and then go back into it and create something completely different than what it was before.
So, with that in mind, what is your definition of liberation?
Oh my goodness. That's a interesting question. I think there's a lot of different forms of liberation. I
Mhm.
I don't know if there's just one really form of liberation, like talking about the artwork that I just did and letting go of the, of matter, of product, of whatever it is that I was holding on to. I mean, there's some emotion in those pieces too that I'm letting go of. So I feel like it's liberation in the sense that I'm no longer held to the standard that I was being held to before, because sometimes artwork can become about what you think other people want, what you think galleries are demanding. And once you let go of that and just say no, like my brain is going to that place. I need to just, burn this down and see what I can create from that. I think that's my, liberation space. I don't know if everybody thinks of it that way, but for me, I'm a very visual learner. I'm a visual thinker. And that's one particular area, yeah, that I think that I get liberation from.
Mhm. Do you find making art a important piece in your experience of liberation or grief?
Yeah, I think it's important for my liberation because in art is for me has never really been just this thing that I do or a hobby. For me, I've always described it as a movement. It's something that I am in movement with. It's an action. And it's not just a stationary thing when I'm not doing it. It is a continuous movement, a continuous action. I cannot not be that thing. And so, oh boy. Yeah. So I think my art for a long time has been a way for me to also manage mental health, and how I work is a direct result of, my mental health and what I've been through in my life. And just the layers upon layers that I put into pieces is me, in a way, working through those things. And it's creating a connection to something that is very important to me. And I feel like that is where the healing part comes in, which I think is important for, any kind of liberation, is that we take care of ourselves, we heal, we rest. And I think that grief for me, if I think about it in relationship to my art, it's mm, it's something that's always there. It's something that never goes away. I feel like grief for me in my life is something that walks beside me. So much like I say, my art is a movement. I feel like I'm always in action with it, even if I'm not actively producing art. I feel like my grief is a relationship as well that is always beside me. And I feel like my art helps me to even better connect, with that side of myself. And my grief gives me freedom so that I can do the art that I do. I don't know if that makes
Mm.
sense, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience with art, when I haven't been able to form words, I can create a piece that explains away what I'm feeling so much better than words.
Mhm. Yeah, it's my art, for the majority of my life has been very abstract work. With, occasionally I'll draw form and representation, but it's always been very abstract work. It's always been about how I feel doing it, what colors feel good that day, what came to me that day outside for birds, what I thought about when I walked down my hill as grief may have been accompanying me. And that's something that I think about quite often when I go on these walks is looking over at my friend grief and seeing what's there today. And
Mhm.
I think those two relationships, so it's interesting that this conversation has evolved into these things, but those two relationships to me, my relationship to art and my relationship to grief, I feel just, it's they're the constants for me.
Would you share maybe the process of creating? What that process looks like or feels like, at least?
Of
Like, are you going through a range of emotions when you're creating? Are you just zoned in? Are you, like,
Yeah.
being in the environment? Like, what
Yeah.
does that feel like?
My process of creating is I have an energy first, and I have to prepare the space. It's picking up the space, it's setting things up the way that I need them to be, having a playlist that I will obsess over for months while I am creating. And generally, it's
Mm,
a few songs that will be on repeat or a certain playlist that will be on repeat that I feel brings me to this level of energy that I need to create. And usually the first day, I'm not even touching the panels or the paints or anything. The first day is just setting up in the space and preparing. And then the next day that I go in, that's when things start to happen. And it's all about releasing the energy that I have. And with the music generally, it's sort of like choreography in a way because I've probably listened to the playlist or the song, 100 times by that point, and then it's a complete energy release at that point for me, and it's all about what colors do I want? What am I feeling? What is the song making me feel? I become something different, and I feel like what I become is, like, not only, like, my true self, but it's, like, my true self in motion, and it makes me cheer up to say that because it's not often in my life that I was able to experience that in the past as much as I can now.
yeah, that's really beautiful, and it sounds ritualistic even, this experience,
Yeah,
like
create
a
is
sacred moment.
it is. I have rituals for sure, things that I do, how I set things up. There's definitely a ritual around it, and it's a part of the energy build to create. I mean, to me, art is about living and being in present moments and energy. And I feel like it gives me a release from grief, which can be so weighty at times. Even though I describe it as a friend, it's not something that any of us really want to have to do, to go on these walks with grief.
Yeah. I mean, do you find yourself wanting to co-create with other people? Like, is there
Mm.
you want to create in community that taps into
And
something larger, maybe about grief or
yeah, there's a couple different types of art that I do, and I'm sort of focusing in on this one particular type, I think, because there's so much grief around it for me. The Another type of artwork that I do is in community, and it's a very different kind of energy. It definitely requires a bit more planning and set up time and things like that. But for me to do community art with other people involved, it's something that I never would have done in my past, ever. And it's only something in middle age that I have started to do to sort of grow community and how community has become so important to me. And I'm doing these little photography projects when I have this time and space around queer bodies and censored words.
Hmm.
And so it sort of creates a space for people to come in and be photographed with these, words that they choose that are censored, or words or phrases that are hard to talk about right now. And I photographed them. And it became something so important to me when I was doing it, because I developed these connections with each person. And even though it was all about, taking pictures of people, it became something so much more than that, because a lot of people would come back and talk with me more about the project and what I was doing and how much it meant to them. It gave me so much energy. It gave me so much life. And I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. It's a beautiful project. And I can imagine taking on something like that, especially when you were saying that you hadn't done a lot of co-creating in the past. Doing something like this takes vulnerability by everybody in the community. But it also, like, I wonder if you had to give yourself permission to engage in this to be able to do it.
Yeah. I had to really hype myself up around it, that it wasn't gonna be a total flop. I had all
Yeah.
of the negative self-talk going on, and I this one thing just kept me going, and the thing that kept me going was that, "You know what? This is queer community. This is your community, and if it's important to you as a queer person here in Vermont, it's gonna be important to other people." And sure enough, it was.
Yeah. Have you felt like you haven't belonged in community, or is that something different?
No. Yeah, no, I think that a majority of my life, I felt like I didn't belong.
Yeah. I feel like that's part of the queer experience, but I think there's also a lot of things that stem off of that as well. Like, for me, growing up in an environment where I couldn't, like, speak my mind or really be my authentic self, to be able to do that now and show people who I am now is so much more meaningful, but I hid myself for so long because I was afraid of how people would see me and if they would even want to see me or if they would see my old self. And that was safer for me for a long time. And when I was my older self, it was so hard for me to build relationships because I feel like people could sense my inauthenticity. And
Yes.
building community when you're not authentically you is so hard because people are like, "Hey, I see you, and there's something not right here."
I feel like the community has seen me so many times before I've even seen myself in some ways, before I was even willing to jump in the pool. It's just like
Mm.
it's interesting. But yeah, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. I never felt like I belonged in any spaces, just having sort of experiences of being the one that wasn't invited in the circle of girls talking in school or whatever the case may be, things like that. I, and having been bullied as well for being queer in high school and having to deal with those kinds of things, I don't know, shut myself off. And I think it's a coping mechanism to shut ourselves off from things and to be like, well, then I'm not going to take that risk, and I have a lot of grief around that because I wish I would have continued to take the risk because I was coming out and at a young age and I was excited about it and I didn't have fear around it, but then I learned very quickly to have fear around it and yeah, so I have grief around that.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's hard. I mean, particularly living in the, like, 90s, being queer in the 90s was super scary. Being a teenager in the 90s was scary as a queer person,
Mhm,
and I don't think, like, it matters where a person lived. I think it was scary everywhere.
mhm.
And I often talk to, like, my younger self and have to kind of reparent that version of me when I'm feeling that grief come up again, or when I'm feeling like I'm not belonging. I'm like, those are old patterns that are not serving me anymore.
Mhm.
Like, if people really didn't want me around, they would stop showing up completely, but people are showing up and they're engaging, and that means that they do want me around. And having a system that is constantly scanning for threats,
Mhm.
like, I have found safety finally in community, in queer community specifically, and within, like, my chosen family. I feel like my nervous system has finally reset for the first time.
Yeah, it's totally relatable. I feel like on so many levels, like having made and found queer community for myself, I have been able to be my authentic self more and more and more to the point where it's like, where is this even going to stop? Hope it never stops. Because I have an art idea like I had last summer with the Uncensored project and other ideas that I've had and directed them towards the queer community and people jump in. Yes,
Mhm.
I'm interested in that too. And it's amazing to be able to throw ideas out and have other people be like, yes, I want to do that thing as well. And let's do that. Like, how do we do that? And to make something happen. Right.
Is there a grief that you would talk to your younger self about? Like, that you wish you could inform your younger self about?
Mm. I think that if I was to have a conversation with my younger self right now, it's I think it would be around the loss of, childhood, the loss of time. I think that that's where my mind goes. I'm not sure if it's so much the conversation I would have with my younger self as much as where my mind goes when I think of those two things is just the loss of childhood, the loss of time. It's something that's ever present. There's this feeling of always being behind and trying to work with grief to let that go.
Do you remember the moment that, like, you kinda lost your innocence? Do you remember when you, like, felt like, "Oh, I'm not a child anymore?"
There's a couple things that come to mind, and I think that I had this sort of one of the many things are popping up right now in my head, I'm going to say that. So I'm trying to sort through them all as all these different little parts of me are like, "Pick me, pick me." But I think one of the things that I think of is that, I grew up in a household with childhood abuse and neglect, and I think that very young, I learned that if something happened to me, I was alone in dealing with it. Uh, no one was ever going to come to me
Mm,
and say, "Well, that was wrong what this person did to you," or "I shouldn't have yelled at you," or "I shouldn't have done this to you." I was never going to have any kind of repair in my life. And if anything traumatic happened in the household, I was going to be alone dealing with it. And so I think without realizing it, even without a definitive, yes, this is when I lost my childhood, I think that it was just something that was never fully mine to begin with. Because I feel like I grew up in a household where people had their own, complex traumas probably, and were just reenacting their old wounds on each other and me and my brother. And so I don't think I ever had any kind of a say or one particular moment. I just feel like it was something that was never going to be truly mine.
mhm. Yeah, that's relatable, to me as well. I don't really remember that, but I've heard people saying that they remember when they felt that change and they felt in that moment that there was a sense of grief that they were never going to experience, like, being able to play outside again. Like, just one day they went back inside, and that was the last time they went out and played.
And
Like, there are things that we don't really think about,
right.
especially as adults, but when a person has experienced trauma, it's even harder to recall
Mhm.
memories, whether they're good or bad or neutral. It can be a lot more muddier. Do you feel like having experienced grief throughout your life that it's gotten easier, or is it difficult every time, or does it depend on what the grief is about?
I think that it's easier to recognize it. I think that in my younger years, even into my 30s, I don't think I would have recognized grief. I think it would have come out as something completely different. And I think that now I recognize it immediately. And there's a relationship that I have with it where it's automatically like I even say, "Oh, hello." There's a couple different parts of grief, right? There's these conversations that I have, and then it's how it affects me depending on what kind of grief it is. Because there's so many different kinds of grief, right? There's loss of loved ones, and
Mhm.
there's, like I'm talking about grieving childhood and lost time. There's so many different types of grief in the world, and it can be kind of messy, but yeah, I say hello.
I feel like there are so many different types of grief, and I think in our society, we teach people to ignore it,
Yeah.
and therefore people don't realize what they're experiencing is grief. So, like, if somebody is getting angry that they got passed up over a promotion, like, that's grief. Or their spouse left them for one reason or another, there's probably going to be grief there. To me, that is the reason for therapy. It's to witness. I feel like grief really needs to be seen and witnessed in a safe way in order to be acknowledged. And when growing up, for in my experience, growing up in a household where nobody knew how to feel their feelings or even acknowledge their feelings, grief was the furthest thing from my mind. I experienced this really small, like, window of emotions, and that was it. And if someone told me back then that, like, sometimes we feel emotions in our bodies, I probably would have laughed because I was so disconnected from my body that, like, I didn't really feel anything.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that turned into chronic pain later, unfortunately. But yeah, grief is everywhere. It's not just loss of another human, it can be loss of ourself, loss of ideas and change.
Loss
What was that?
loss of the life you thought you would have.
And like not having expectations
Mm,
anymore, like being let down by a society that keeps telling us that we need to be productive, and then our body breaks and we become disabled. There's grief in that when society says that we're unworthy because we can't do the things that we once could
mm,
do. There's grief with aging in the same in a similar way, rather, because our bodies are not going to be able to do the same things that they could do 20, 30 years ago once we're a little bit older. So grief is everywhere, and I think once we take a step back and actually look, we can see it. And I think so many people are afraid of looking at it because grief tends to represent death and that kind of loss. And that's the scariest thing for people, it seems. People embracing the unknown. They would rather run away in America anyway. There are other cultures where they fully embrace it. And it's a part of everyday life where they honor the people who have died and keep them in the house for a while and let the spirit leave. They'll fully let the body air out for a week or so. And even children don't run away because it's just part of life and it's understood. So it's fascinating to think about all the things we tend to run away from in our
mm,
society. And when I think of this, I think of like queer community too. Like queer people deserve a good death. Queer people deserve to be seen and not hidden away. And like your project, I think it's a really beautiful representation of what being seen is.
mhm. A couple things I think are coming up for me around what you said, and I think that one of the things is, you had talked about not knowing, what grief was, early on and things like that because trauma sort of we're in survival mode and we just don't know. A very distinguishable moment in trauma therapy of noticing grief for the one of the first times. It wasn't something that was easy to get to. And I think that once I was able to experience grief, like truly experience it and be like, I'm actually grieving this loss of time of being dissociated and all these things. I don't it's very healing, and I think queer community understands grief. You know, I think we really do. We understand all of those pieces that we've been talking about. And there's grief around not being accepted by family. There's grief around having to hide, all these different things that come up for queer folks. I remember death and dead bodies. It's something that's always fascinated me, and I've never been afraid of the dead. Even when I would go to funerals as a child, I was always very interested, and kids are naturally curious anyway, I suppose, but I was the kid that was weird and probably lingering around the casket, and my mother would make me leave. But later, when I ended up becoming a nurse practitioner and was a nurse for many years, and I've pronounced and been at the bedsides of people who are dying, I've seen so many deaths. I've witnessed so many deaths, and I've pronounced so many people dead that I just see the release in it now. The release from suffering, there's a lot of relief in it as well. And that's I probably have somewhat of a different perspective on it than a lot of other people because I see so much of it, and
Mhm.
it's there's and I'm not afraid of, you know, dead bodies or anything like that. Like I said, I've seen so many, and I've had to do the aftercare for people who have passed away as a nurse, as a floor nurse, and it's still an intimate thing to do, preparing them for the family to come back in the room or just to move on to their next, destination. And yeah, I've never been afraid of I don't afraid of it, afraid of witnessing it, afraid of seeing it.
Think that's really beautiful, actually. I mean, we are supposed to be afraid of so many things in our society, and to not be afraid of the one thing that, like, we're all going to experience, but pretend like we're not going to for
Mhm.
some time. I think that's really cool. I think I was afraid of dying for a really long time, actually, until my best friend died, and I really had to face it for myself. I was really afraid of it, but I was also fascinated by it. The first short story I ever wrote was in kindergarten, and I illustrated it. It was on thick lined paper. It was a vampire story. And, like, thinking about this story as an adult, like, it lands so different. But the story was about this vampire. He would come and visit me in my room, and I wasn't afraid of him. And he would come to me because I was the only person that wasn't afraid of him. And he just wanted to be accepted and loved and not have to hide. And so he would come visit me at night. He never bit my neck or anything like that. We just started planning, like, okay, how can we get you to be accepted in this world? And I just feel like that's so telling of my kindergarten self, where I was and what I was exposed
Mhm.
to. But I was also terrified of dead bodies. In fact, when my grandmother died, my mom and my sister literally picked me up off the floor. Off the floor. I was standing. They picked me up and moved me towards the open
Mm.
casket without my consent, and I kept saying, "No, I wasn't ready," and my mom said that I had to face the truth, and it was like, it wasn't that I wasn't facing the truth, I wasn't ready to see my grandmother like that, like, I needed a little bit more time, and to be forced to do something you're not ready to see, it made that block bigger, in that moment for me, and I just avoided those thoughts and the thoughts of death way more after that point because I had no consent. And that was a common experience for me, is not having consent to my own experience. And I feel like as soon as I was able to give consent, which came through community and chosen family, I experienced consent for the first time with my best friend, and it blew me away. I'm like, wait, you have to ask for a hug? Okay. And then now I'm like, oh yeah, I always ask for a hug now. I don't just demand it or put my arm out and expect someone to want it. Like, it blew my mind that that was a thing because I never had it.
Mhm.
And I've learned boundaries through community and chosen family.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I also, lost my father in, just a few months ago now. And it's interesting because I was curious how I would be because, it's the first death that I've had for quite some time of somebody that's known me for so long, my whole life. And I really didn't know how I would be. And the to me, like the actual dying process, the part where he was, actively dying and, leaving was the least challenging, I would say, even though I think that we all end up having some kind of around it. There's no perfect death. There's never going to be a perfect death. It's just people can go peacefully at some point, but it's never going to be a 100% easy, smooth process. And I think that
Yeah.
afterwards, it's really interesting what happens with that kind of grief because I think there's a different kind of a grief that happens when you lose a parent. I think that when you lose a parent, there's this uprooting of yourself because you were tied to this person. It's the person who has known you since you were born into this world. They were there. And suddenly, that person is gone. And it's like, well, who am I now? There's this whole process that goes along with the grief work of who am I now? What do I do now? Who am I now that I'm not tied to this person? And there's a huge process around that, especially if it's my father was elderly and he had been slowly probably dying for a long time and just not ready. And it required a lot of care. And I think that there's a grief process around experiences like that because we're still anticipating something to happen even after they're gone. It's like, when is that phone call going to
Mm.
come that they're going back into the hospital or whatever it may be? That was the hard thing for me with a parent dying that was elderly, was that feeling that it was a bodily sensation of waking up. What do I have to do for dad today? Did I forget something? And I think that not all of us get sort of acknowledgement, before somebody starts the dying process and can't speak anymore, like acknowledgement of past wrongs or get to have those conversations. But I was very fortunate that he was able to give me that in his own way.
Yeah.
But he did. And I think that it made the process easier for me because there was a lot of trauma in my life because of him. And I was very boundaried, even though he had been sick for a long time. And it's another thing. There's just so much grief wrapped up into that relationship. And when he passed, I felt, one, there was a lot of relief there because he had been sick and steadily declining for a long time. And, caregiver burnout and is real. It's a very real, challenging thing.
Mhm.
And I had to come to terms with all of that. And now, about a few months later, it's interesting because, and I never could have imagined that his death and through a grief process that I would get to a point where I actually can hear him cheering me on. And because there were some things that we had in common politically, we were aligned for the most part, I would say, and in other
Mhm.
things, other ways. And he did appreciate certain things about the type of person that I was.
Mm.
And I hear him cheering me on in those ways. And like when we're talking about, things we do in queer community, ways that we speak out or are active in our community, I hear him egging me on. So he's become sort of this part of me that's no longer traumatizing me. It's quite it's hard to even talk about. I haven't really talked about it too much yet, but I have an experience of him as just being my cheerleader, so to speak, which in some ways he was, but these other things always overshadow it, right? And so I have grief that
Yeah.
in his death, I felt his pride in me maybe more than I did when he was alive, you know?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you being so open about that because I think a lot of people will relate to that. Like feeling so many expectations in life and then not feeling them anymore, but feeling just the original love that was meant to be there in some form or fashion, whether it is being cheered on or silence or however that might show up. But I think that that is likely a very relatable
Yeah,
experience. Do you feel like tied into the oneness of the universe through that experience, or is it just a closeness to him?
I feel like it's a closeness to, like, what you were talking about earlier, like, the way the love should have always been, like, sort of there's this
Mm, mhm,
activity that I did once in therapy called it was like a preconception activity, and kind of what you were talking about makes me think of that a little bit, like, what was I like before any trauma ever touched me? And in that moment of doing this activity through trauma therapy, I was given sort of this gift, this glimpse of what that is. And so many of us with trauma have grief around that because
mhm,
we'll never know totally, we'll never really totally know.
mhm,
But yeah, as far as oneness, or I tend to have that experience more when I'm in nature and with animals, and this might be
mhm,
trauma related, than I do in relation to people. I would say feeling so connected to everything and feeling almost a part of the seasons and migrations and all the things that happen and being full from that. I don't
mhm.
know that I've experienced it with his death or not. They're also passed away many years ago, but I I don't know that I've experienced it in that way in relation. Yeah.
For me, I can feel that oneness
Mm,
in community when I get lost, like especially in art. Like I can get
mhm.
lost in art whether it's a movie, a painting, a song, there's so many different types of art pieces that like move me, and I get stuck in this thought pattern of like, wow, where did these paints come from? Where did this canvas come from? What is the whole history of the person who created this? Like, if it's a song, like what happened to them? Like, there's a Nora Jones album that I used to listen to a lot, and it would make me cry. Listen to it from start to finish, and I would just be like, "Oh my gosh, Nora Jones, who hurt you?" Like, it was such a heartbreaking, beautiful record. But I felt a oneness too through my feelings because I know I'm not the only one
Mhm.
that's feeling that. And that's where art can be really beautiful and bring people
True,
together, in my
true.
opinion.
It does.
I also feel like when I'm in community, I
Mm,
get more hugs, and I don't get a lot of those outside of that. And that, like, in itself is a feeling of unity and oneness. Like, not that I
mm,
feel like I'm enmeshing myself with another human, but like there's a grounding to it, and there is a moment of just like everything aligned for this hug to
mhm.
happen.
Yeah, it's true.
And I'm not talking about, like, the hugs that I got from my brothers where they, like, put a finger on my shoulder and tapped it kinda hug. Like, I mean, like, a real hug. Like, my best friend gave the best hugs. It was, like, 2 arms fully around a person, and I think that was the first time I really got a good hug was with my best friend, and I was like, "Whoa, okay. Is this what this is supposed to feel like? Because I think I've been doing this wrong."
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying
Uh,
about, like, feeling like a oneness. I experienced those things for sure. I think the easiest way for me to feel it, though, is with nature, and to me, when I'm feeling that, it's, present moment, it's like you're talking about, like, like, you're connected to all the things that are going on and aware of so many things all at once, and it's feeling purpose without thinking of a to-do list. It's feeling peace without even
mhm,
trying. And I find that,
mhm,
like, the other day, like, for example, I feed my birds, I go outside within an hour of waking up every day. This is my practice. And I've done this without even knowing it for a long time, but now I do it with more sort of intention within the first hour of waking up. Then I go outside and I
mhm,
fill the bird feeder and look around at what's happening out there. But the other day I noticed this little creature darting into a hole on one side of the path that I walk to feed the birds, and they darted from one side of the path to the other into a hole. And I noticed near the bird feeder, there was another little hole in the snow. And I began immediately thinking, like, oh, yes, there's all these animals right now under the snow having their own sort of warm little community, not necessarily even underground, all of them,
mm,
but like underneath leaves and sticks and things. And this is
mhm.
called the subnivean zone. And I end up sort of
Neat.
feeling so connected. It's like this little gift of this creature running across my path, and then me imagining his life and what that is, like you're talking about with art, right? Like, what is this artist's
Mhm,
life? Where did they come from? What did they do?
mhm,
Why did they create this? Like this, it's the similar thing. It's he like what is it exactly? What type of creature? It's a vole probably, and it's like he's under there making all of these little channels under the snow, and there's other things that he's interacting with, and it's a whole world that I've never even seen, but I know that it exists. And it brings me so much comfort to know that there it's this whole world under the snow with just the 15 feet walk to my bird feeder. And now I have this name for it too, right? The subnivean zone. And I've since looked up what other animals are existing there and how they're existing there and what they're doing. And I have this understanding of it and why it's important to, not mow my lawn and things like this and leave brush piles. And I feel, like in land stewardship, I feel connected to that. I feel very connected.
Yeah.
And it made me not only feel connected, but like just my heart just swelled because I was like, oh, there's so many voles this year. And when I feel connected through land stewardship and, you know, not using chemicals and, all these different things that we do to try and keep the land, safe and good for animals. It's, yeah, I feel it then too.
I was going to ask what's bringing you joy lately, and
And
it
it
sounds
just
like that's bringing
honestly,
you
it
joy.
probably would have come up no matter what during this conversation because it's my special little research interest. Like when I'm not in school, it's easy to read about, and I found some books that are talking about these animals there, and I'm just like, okay, like has anyone ever put a camera down in there? Like, what does it really look like in there? Like, my imagination
Mm,
fires.
that's really neat. Do you think that your experience overall with grief and loss perhaps has opened up how you feel joy?
I feel like they work together. And I feel like I walk with grief, I experience it, I sit with it, I talk with it, like, and it helps me to be in my body, to be present, to be able to experience the world when I do that practice. Everyone calls it something differently, but for me, it's just going on walks with grief. And I feel like because I do that, with some regularity, I feel like my experience of joy is easier, like easier in the sense that in smaller things. So it's not these big things, these big, huge occasions that I need to feel joy or these big gifts or whatever it is that brings people joy. Sometimes it's just seeing a little vole sneak across a path, right? It's the smaller things, like my jade plant bloomed this winter all over and it was beautiful. And that brought me so much joy. And it's the accumulation of all of these little joys on and off throughout the day, the week that, you know, that get me through.
Yeah, I feel like grief has caused
Mhm.
me to slow
Mhm.
down in a way. And through that experience, I feel like I notice joy come up a lot more because
Mhm.
I've slowed down so much more than how I used to be and how so many people around me are. Because I really do think joy comes from the spaces between, like, maybe the spaces between grief, but it's never just a moment of joy. Usually it's paired with something. It's an in-between moment where it catches me off guard, or even if it's something that I'm anticipating, it's it doesn't last as long as grief feels for me. So I really try to savor the moments that I have with joy, knowing that they are fleeting and having so much more gratitude for those
Mhm,
moments because of that.
mhm. Yeah, when they happen, there's definitely more of a gratitude around it for me, like, and I genuinely say, like, thank you," and it's definitely something that's important to me, is the little things more so than the big things, because 'cause they're all fleeting.
One last question for you. So, if there is one thing you would want listeners to take away from our conversation, what
Ooh.
would you want that to be?
To sit with grief, that it's okay to sit with it. It's not scary. You can have a conversation with it. It's okay to have grief. It's okay to let it out and to share it with others and the people that can sit with you in that space. Those are your people. Those are your people. Because to me, grief is one of the most important states and emotions that we can sit with, be with.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I appreciate your time, your energy, your vulnerability, your openness to share all of this today. And I just wish my listeners to be kind to themselves. And see you
Thank
in the next
you.
episode.